1. I had a manager in a produce department I worked. This guy was something else. He had been there since he was a young guy and was large and in charge, and got away with a lot of BS. He was a workplace bully and really had a target on me, but would also lay it on others, getting the young kids who worked there to be his little slaves. I work 'em hard, were his words once. I have many, many stories of that department in store. I could write a book, but I'll cut to the chase. One day, on one of his tirades against management because they told him to do his job, he was venting at me. He was threatening to quit, calling his boss all sorts of nasty and being a shithead. He says to me, "I'm just going to pull the wrong pallet and hurt my back. I'll get you to fill out the report, and I'm out of here." Now, I was enjoying seeing him meltdown, but when he said that, I just went along with him. Empathy, sympathy, apathy, and all the lip service. But I knew him, his games, and I kept what he said in my mind. I also went to the management upstairs and asked to be taken off of the first aid duty sheet. I told them that due to all the calls I was handling, I needed a break for a bit, and let the younger guys get some action. I was level 3 with experience, so everyone would bypass other FAs who had level 1 and call me. Which really pissed my manager off. Produce manager would come down to the first aid room, barge in and demand I get back to the floor. All while I'm wrapping a cut hen from the deli department. Now, being off the roster meant that I was under no obligation to render any aid, and I couldn't tell the big boss about his plan, because the boss would not back me up. If it was any catastrophe or a serious injury, I would jump in, regardless of roster status. I'm a jerk, not an a-hole. Some months later, I came in for my closing shift around noon. Mr. Manager comes to see me, all sad and doe-eyed. "I hurt my back this morning, and I need your help. Can you write up a report?" He tells me that he, surprise, pulled a pallet and hurt his back. At 7:30 that morning. A golden gift was given to me that day. I told him I was sorry. I was off the duty roster, and he would need to call one of the other attendants. Also, I reminded him that he should have reported it right after it happened, and that could influence a denial of claims. Well, I heard him sputter, and I saw that look on his face. I can't describe it, but it was like he'd been deflated, utterly deflated, that he couldn't get a visit from the compensation ferry. I had a great rest of the day, and down the road I would make subtle remarks of how it was a shame he still had to come into work. It was a shame to have to be so underhanded and sneaky. But that was the way it was in that small town. The only grocery store too, so kinda hard to get true justice. Had I done what he wanted, I would have lost my certification, gotten fired, and maybe even charged. This guy really wanted to cause me trouble, so I had to always cover my ass. And our big boss didn't care about anything except a cheeseburger. 2. I work for my country's customs administration. Me and a colleague are responsible for all import-related inquiries within a certain geographic area. Me handling private imports while he is in charge of commercial business imports. If you import something into my nation as a business, you have to input a ton of information into a centralized system, which then calculates how much you owe the government in import tax fees and VAT. Companies that are engaged in importing goods usually do the aforementioned administrative tasks either in-house or hire a forwarding agent. The process is fairly complicated, so there are various ways my colleague tries to help businesses that haven't gotten the hang of it yet, especially when they are newly formed and quite small. My colleague gets a call. Calls are always put on speakers, so there is another person who can confirm what is being said. From what I can only describe as the most obnoxious woman I have ever had the misfortune of hearing. The woman explains, without even a greeting, that she has opened some sort of thrift store for small trinkets relating to crystal healing, no joke, that's the type of shop she opened. Then she explains that she ordered a rather large amount of merchandise from abroad, and now wants us to make the necessary system entries into our system. My colleague is nice. Very nice. After confirming in our database that this is the first time the woman made a business report, He kindly does it for her on his computer, while explaining the whole procedure to her. The whole brouhaha takes about 90 minutes. After everything is done, he tells her that the next time she will have to do it herself or hire a forwarding agent. The woman just says that she will be expecting the bill for the import duties in the mail and hangs up. 1 month goes by, another call from the obnoxious woman. This time she bluntly states that the next import is due and that she has another order for my colleague. My colleague, still with a voice like honey, explains to the woman that this time he won't be able to oblige. He explains that the last time was to show her how it works, and that he would be happy to give her an industry site listing the various forwarding agents who can help her. Unfortunately, it doesn't go any further, as the woman immediately cuts my colleague off. She informs him that she knows the law and thus is aware he is required to help her fill in the forms, whether he wants to or not. My colleague obliges. After another 90 minutes, he wishes her a nice day and tells her that the bill will be coming in the mail again. After that, my colleague takes a deep breath and opens a form on his computer I haven't seen before. Seeing my confusion, he proceeds to tell me what the form is for. Apparently, the Customs Administration is indeed required to make the system entries for businesses if asked. However, in order to not interfere with the free market, and probably as to not incur the wrath of the forwarding agent mafia, the Customs Administration can charge businesses for the time our employees spend on such requests. My colleague then shows me the fee table, and my jaw drops through the floor while my eyebrows visit the back of my head. The fee is charged for every 15 minutes of work and makes the hourly fee of the greediest forwarding agent look like a bargain. My colleague prints out a single bill containing the import fees, as well as the charge for his time spent on the woman's request, the charge being higher than the import fees, and drops it into the mail. What happened next was handled by a different office, so I will have to summarize. Woman complains that charging her for my colleague's work is illegal, and is shut down because it is perfectly legal. Woman then complains that she didn't know about the law, and is shut down because me and my colleague confirm that she said she knew the law. Woman then pays up. She never called my colleague again. 3. I am a diesel mechanic that works for one of the largest 2 fleets in the United States. My job is to work off-site for a single customer, which is one of the largest middlemen of the product they ship in the US. I can't say much more about the product, because this would give away exactly who they are. Anyway, my job is to load up my truck at the shop with parts and oil, travel to the customer's site, take inventory of the units on their yard, compare the list to overdue and coming due services, work on the customer write-up list, work on our internal company campaign list, send an email and internal memo about any truck I work on and receive info about, pay attention to the internal group text, keep up on my training online, do repairs on site, and look at drive-ups as they come in. I have to keep track of everything. It took some getting used to, but I'm decent at it now. In the state I work in, the law states that during our required 30-minute meal period, we are to be paid if we remain on the clock and have to do anything work-related during the meal period. My first few days, I clocked out for lunch but was immediately interrupted by a drive-up. Our timekeeping program has no allowances for adjustments to state that I had to work in my meal period. I don't mind working when I'm trying to eat, so I simply don't clock out for lunch, as I tend to nibble through the day anyway. The customer likes that I'm always available, and I get 30 minutes overtime each day. With the days I work, I get 2 hours overtime every week. If I work a day extra, I get a lot more. The customer is happy, which makes my boss happy, which makes me more money and makes me happy. Win-win-win. Last week, I was notified by my company that we are now on 0-minute overtime, and we must take our lunches and breaks. No problem. I'm pretty compliant because my boss is cool. I was also told to be done at the shop, again no problem. I don't really care where and when they want them done. Any overtime has to be pre-approved by my boss's boss's boss. I've worked with him in the past and he's also pretty cool, but he's very busy and rarely responds right away. Here's the malicious compliance part. I now come back to the shop for my breaks and lunch near the end of the day, because I'm not interrupted there. That's an hour not at the customer's yard. I also have to come back here to do services, so I'm rarely at the customer's yard now. As any overtime requests go mostly unnoticed, I don't do any more overtime. I get drive-ups during the day, and I have to tell the drivers to contact corporate, as I have to adhere to these new rules or I'll be fired. The broken-down tractors and trailers are piling up in the customer's yard because I'm barely there, and they're piling up in the shop yard because I now spend most of my time driving back and forth, and the other staff count at the shop hasn't increased. No overtime, more driving in circles, much less actual work. 4. So, we live on a residual street, but that street is one of the main entry and exit points to the neighborhood, with a lighted intersection at a main street. So there is heavier traffic in our road than in other parts of the neighborhood. And people using it are often pretty dickish about the use of shared space. People often speed, run stop signs, and blow down the street despite speed bumps and the presence of children. It's stupid and dangerous. And when we're out walking my dog, we just wave everyone by. Our neighborhood has multiple schools and kids all over the place at all times of day. Elderly folks out for a stroll, dog walkers, cyclists, people doing people things in their neighborhood. My main method of transportation is by bike, and let me tell you, these folks who don't understand that you drive differently in a neighborhood than you do in a main road or freeway have a real hard time with that despite being on, again, a residential street. But my neighborhood, she has my back. About a block and a half away from my house, there is a vicious dip. Like this thing will fuck your car up bad unless you go over in a lifted truck or absolutely crawling, like barely moving. This dip is also difficult to see and gauge the severity of, and usually people aren't paying attention. If you don't live here, you may not know about it or underestimate it, and we hear the crunch of bumpers and the scrape of undercarriages all the time, followed quickly by the brakes of people who aren't focused on the road. The intersection where this dip is only has 2 stop signs for cross-traffic to the dip, letting the dip do the work of slowing traffic down like a yield sign. Today, like many other days, I was coming home from the store, and a car was pulled up behind me. I was riding center lane because there were people working between 2 parked cars, and I could see and hear, but the driver behind me couldn't. My presence in the middle of the street really fucked them right off, and they started gunning their engine, rather than waiting for me to clear the parked cars. I glanced behind me, saw the gesticulations, and sped up. I hit that dip going at least 15 miles per hour, fast for a bike, but well below speed limits for a residential area. If I stand up on my bike pedals and use my knees and elbows to absorb the shock, it's actually not a big deal for me to hit this dip going fast. In fact, I rarely slow down for it, though don't often intentionally speed up. Unless the driver behind me is acting like they have no sense in, once again, a residential neighborhood. Now this car and I are on a journey together that will not end well for one of us. I speed up and I imagine they feel good that I got the message and am fleeing, fear in my little heart, at the might of their vehicle, which was a nice-ass car, a Jaguar. I almost felt bad. Almost. I hit the dip, as usual, and kept going. About 2 seconds later, they hit the dip. The sound of scraping plastic, grating metal, and the bounce of their entire car smacking the asphalt took all my rage at their entitlement and turned it to pretty smoke that was carried away with the breeze. I felt lighter. Immediately following this episode, I did what I always intended to do, and moved to the right where there were no cars or people and let them pass. The speed at which they went over the remaining speed bumps was comical, like a child tiptoeing past the room of sleeping parents to steal a cookie in the dead of night. This is not the first time I've done this, it won't be the last. I have also been a helpful fairy. When I see a car coming too fast, I wave them down, if they're behind me, and have been keeping a respectful distance. I slow to make them slow, saving the underside of their car. I am not only a siren, luring drivers into the depths of this dip, but so help me, every time a driver puts me or someone else in danger, I will sing the siren song of the dip as loudly as I can, and watch them dash themselves upon it. 5. This process was built up over several incidents, leading to one final nail in the coffin. To set the stage, this was an on-campus cafe, almost exclusively staffed by student workers as work-study. The only other people working there were the managers, who had to be non-student workers. The managers, when we started, were the day manager Brenda, night manager Chris, and flex manager Trudy. There was only one other non-student worker, Sandy, there at the time, who was hired to work the sandwich bar they installed that no one used because what college student is going to order a subpar sandwich instead of french fries and a burger or mozzarella sticks? Brenda regularly gave special treatment to the day crew, insisting that the night crew were lazy and didn't do the job properly, despite us regularly having to clean up after the day crew who didn't do any of the end-of-shift work. One of those, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean types. Literally made us clean ceiling tiles once. Chris was a fantastic guy, really cared about the workers and the job, but got a lot of flack from Brenda because her crew could do no wrong, and his crew was barely worth the little pay we got. He eventually got a better job and we were super happy for him. However, that meant that the night crew had no manager. And as previously stated, since managers had to be non-student workers, and they couldn't hire anyone on such short notice, Sandy got promoted to be the new night manager. Sandy did not take the new position with grace, and did not make any attempt to learn how the whole kitchen worked. She just made up rules on the fly as she thought it should be done, and attempted to enforce them regardless of how absurd it would be, i.e. recipe changes, cook times, serving volumes, etc. We collectively ignored her idiocy, but as I was the only white female on the night crew, she singled me out as the subject of her power-tripping nonsense. When I was frustrated at her absurd rules she gave me, I followed them because I was 19, freshly out of an abusive relationship, and really needed the money. First, I wasn't allowed to be at the counter calling out and handing out orders because I spent too much time talking to my friends, when in reality I was making small talk with the people ordering, as one does in customer service. Second, I wasn't allowed to work in the kitchen because I spent too much time talking and not enough time working, when it was just that we all got along really well because the night crew were all friends outside of work, so we could chat and work really efficiently at the same time. Lastly, I wasn't allowed to work the front counter because that's what she wanted to do. So what did that leave for me to do? Minor cleaning, which did not take long. Dishes, which also did not take long. And nothing. At one point, I sat in the back next to the cooler for 4 hours on my phone, because everything that I could have been doing I was expressly told not to, so I did as I was told, and did nothing. During the middle of all this, she had taken over a mid-shift from Trudy, who was awesome and really understanding. There was an error on the schedule that showed me starting an hour before I actually came in. I had addressed this with Trudy and Brenda, and both were fine with me showing up after my class got out, which put me in exactly 1 hour after my start time. Sandy called me multiple times that day she was filling in, but I did not answer as I was in class at the time. I came in for my regular and she refused to let me clock in. I had to call Brenda and leave her a message explaining the situation, so that I didn't get fired for not showing up to a shift. All of this came to a head after I injured my ankle and was on crutches for 2 weeks. I don't remember why, but I only had 1 shift during the 2 weeks I was on crutches. I spoke with Brenda and she told me and Sandy that I was to sit on a stool and work the register for my shift. Stool was brought up, and on it I sat for 3 of my 5 hours, before Sandy decided that she had not inflicted her bullshit on me that day, and had to rectify that. She told me I was no longer allowed to work on the register and that I was to spend the remainder of my shift in the back standing and washing the massive pile of dishes. Could I have fought her and insisted upon what Brenda had said? Sure, but I was in no mood to get yelled at in front of a long line of people, and I was in pain. We had already complained to Brenda and Trudy about her behavior towards me, and I had really had enough. Cue malicious compliance. I put on a fake smile and said, "Of course, I'll go back and spend the rest of my shift standing, doing dishes," and hobbled my ass to the back and stood on one crutch for 2 hours washing dishes. My friends who were waiting on me tried to get me to push back against her, but I told them that I was just doing what I was told, and we could deal with it afterwards. The next day, all 4 of us from the night crew wrote individual letters to the general manager, going over everything she'd been doing to us during her time as manager, and including the incident from that night. We finally had something happen that they couldn't ignore or push to the side, as a difference of opinion. They gave her a stern talking to, told me they didn't say any names, but we all knew she knew. She refused to talk to me from then on. I could do what I wanted and actually do my work for about a week until the power tripping started again. After that, within the span of a week, all 4 night crew members put in our 2 weeks' notice, and after we left, the whole place was in shambles. During the final 2 weeks that we were there, we were all very vocal about our issues with Cindy. And one day, after a particularly brutal reprimand from what we heard, she just stopped showing up. But the management had shown their true colors, and we were over it. The day crew didn't know how to do prep, and the one person they pulled to do night crew was so inefficient that they couldn't keep up. They barely managed to stay afloat through the end of the semester. The next semester, a new company had taken over and revamped the cafe with most of the same food and such, but new branding and some new things added. They also had taken over the cafeteria, which had originally been managed by the original company that ran the cafe. I felt bad for Trudy because she was awesome, but it was so satisfying watching a company's downfall due to poor management and a little bit of malicious compliance. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 226. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Now please give me one extra click before you close out the window and hit that like button. It just takes a second and it helps the channel greatly. Okay, now let's see. Let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, name a book you wish you hadn't been made to read in high school. And I'm going to pick The Crucible because I was made to study that as part of the curriculum for 2 years in high school, 1 year in English class and the following year in drama. So by the time those 2 years were done, I was royally and thoroughly done with anything to do with it. Which does suck because conceptually it's great and it's something that I should enjoy. I have enjoyed similar things. But I swear, those 2 years of high school just sucked the life out of it for me. What are some of yours? I'd love to see them in a comment below. With that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.